and welcome to Washington Talk. I'm Eun Cho. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un ordered the country's military, the munitions industry, and the nuclear weapons sector to accelerate war preparations. South Korea has vowed to retaliate strongly against any provocations by the North. Today, we discuss ways to strengthen the U.S. and South Korean missile defenses and the alliance's approach to North Korea.
이후 발생하는 모든 사태에 대한 책임은 전적으로 북한에게 있음을 다시 한번 엄중히 경고한다.
도발을 당하면 즉각 보복 대응하고 그리고 나중에 보고해 주기 바랍니다.
In the studio with me, Mr. Richard Lawless, founding principal of NMV Consulting. Mr. Lawless was former Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Asian and Pacific Security Affairs and also served as Deputy Head of the U.S. delegation to the Beijing Six-Party Talks. Mr. Lawless has also spent 15 years as a clandestine services officer in the Central Intelligence Agency, where he specialized in nuclear proliferation issues. His recently published book, Hunting Nukes, addresses both South Korea and North Korea's nuclear programs. Also joining us, Dr. Robert Soofer, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council's Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security. Dr. Soofer was Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Nuclear and Missile Defense Policy until 2021. He was also the U.S. representative to the NATO High-Level Group for Nuclear Planning. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Now, Mr. Lawless, North Korea recently launched a solid-fuel ICBM Hwasong-18. When Kim Jong-un opened the plenary meeting for the Workers' Party Central Committee, he praised the achievements of the year. Now, do you think North Korea has the capability to strike the U.S. mainland, considering the range and the re-entry capability?
I think this is an important development, and I do believe they're going to do everything they can in the months ahead, the years ahead, to develop a robust capability to strike the United States. That means more than one or two. It may mean a dozen. It may mean 24, but the Hwasong-18 is a huge problem and will become more one for the United States.
Dr. Soofer, for the U.S., the major missile threat comes from Russia and China, and North Korea has been more of a marginal threat. Now, the possibility of North Korea striking the U.S. mainland with ICBM, is this something that is seriously being considered within the U.S. government?
Yes, it very much is. There are very few things that Republicans and Democrats can agree on, but the threat from North Korea and the response in terms of homeland missile defense is one of those. You may recall that it was President Bush that began deployment of our ground-based interceptors. That decision was reaffirmed by the Obama administration. In fact, they added an additional 14 missiles. Trump has expanded that by 20, and the Biden administration, too, has reaffirmed the need to expand our U.S. homeland missile defenses against the North Korean ICBM threat.
Mr. Lawless, the purpose of the U.S. missile defense is deterrence. Do you think the U.S. is giving out enough warning to North Korea that if it strikes United States with a missile, then there will be a retaliatory strike back against North Korea and North Korea will be wiped off the map?
I think there needs to be a stronger warning. Reference Robert's comments. Our homeland defense ground-based system is capable of handling only so much in terms of incoming ICBMs. There will be a tipping point at which the United States decides the North Korean ICBM threat is not acceptable. We haven't reached that yet, but deterrence at that point in time will have to become much more sufficient, much more defined, so that North Korea cannot assume it has the ability to overcome our ground-based missile defense system, which heretofore has only been ascribed for a very limited number of incoming missiles. So I think we're going to reach during the next administration that all-important tipping point?
Well, yes, I would agree. In fact, the U.S. policy is to stay ahead of that North Korean threat. So as North Korea expands its ICBM capabilities, we will have to expand ours. But bear in mind that our strategy for dealing with the ICBM threat is not just homeland active missile defense. It's a combination of nuclear deterrence, as you suggested, as well as what we call left of launch or attack operations, right? So it's a combination of finding those missiles on the ground before they're launched and striking them. It's a combination of intercepting them in the air once they're launched. But finally, it's making clear to the North Korean regime that there will be catastrophic consequences and that we would retaliate. So it's a combination of active defense, left of launch, and nuclear deterrence. If I could just summarize this, it's making it clear to the North Koreans that any nuclear attack against the United States will not only be futile, because we will shoot down their missiles, but it will be fatal because they can expect a response.
So are we at that tipping point? And North Korea paraded dozens of ICBM during the 75th anniversary of the founding of its army back in February, and America has 44 interceptors. And just doing the math, wouldn't the North Korean ICBMs overwhelm the American missile defense system?
So it depends on a lot of assumptions. So if they have 12 and we have 44, and you assume we only fire 2 against 1, then we have enough, right? 12 times 2 is 24. If we fire 3 against one of them, that's 36. We still have enough, right? So it really depends on your assumptions. But again, remember, we are not just going to sit back and wait for them to launch these missiles. Once they start launching a few missiles, we will be countering them with our own strikes. So again, missile defense is a combination of attack as well as defense, as well as a threat of retaliation. So yes, I think we have enough.
Dr. Soofer, so how does the United States stay ahead of North Korea's missile development? It's coming up with a lot of different ranges, and ICBM is also very sophisticated with solid fuel ICBM.
Right. So what we're doing now is we're actually modernizing the ground-based interceptor. It's called the Next Generation Interceptor, which we will field in another 3 to 4 years. And each one of the Next Generation Interceptor will have 3 or 4, or maybe even more kill vehicles on board. So you're going to have more bang for your buck, if you will. But in addition to the NGI, the United States also has the ability to shoot down North Korean ICBMs with its sea-based interceptor called Standard Missile 3. And so we can deploy more of those to deal with the North Korean threat.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Soofer, so do you think the United States, South Korea, and Japan should have an integrated missile defense system to stay ahead of North Korean threat together? And in which case do you think South Korea and Japan should be part of the U.S.-led integrated missile defense system?
I would say yes. We have a saying in the missile defense business that sort of the golden ring is to be able to have any sensor, radars, what have you, speak to any interceptor. Right, so you can have a THAAD radar speaking to a Patriot interceptor, and by doing that, you build a synergy, you maximize the capabilities. Likewise, if you can have a Japanese radar talk to a South Korean interceptor, can talk to a U.S. sensor, this gives you the most capability. So integration is key.
Mm-hmm. And Mr. Lawless, some in South Korea are resistant to being integrated into the U.S.-led missile defense system. How would you convince these people? And in Japan, how is the sentiment? Are they less resistant?
I think it's important to educate people. And I feel in both Japan and in Korea, we have to do a lot more to educate the body politic and the decision makers. What we have now are the first steps, very incremental baby steps in what's called missile early warning systems being integrated. This is just the beginning of what has to be done. In both countries, Japan and Korea, the platforms themselves that launch the intercepting missiles must be upgraded, the sensors must be upgraded, the missiles themselves need to be better able to perform in a united, integrated way, and we're not even at the beginning steps of doing that. So when you see people talk about, oh, we've had this great agreement and now we have integrated missile early warning, that's great. But what we really need to have is a truly integrated ballistic missile defense system with all 3 countries talking to one another real time. We don't have that yet. And so we've got a long way to go, and we don't have much time to get there. So this is a very urgent task. We've made a good start, but we need to move out quickly in both South Korea and Japan.
And when educating the public, people in South Korea and some political circles, they are concerned that the integrated missile defense system could cover missiles from China and Russia, and being close to China geographically, that is a burden to the South Koreans. How would you address such unique situation?
Well, South Korea finds itself in a unique situation somewhat more than Japan does. But I don't think the Republic of Korea has any choice. The time for delaying decisions, the time for not making itself part of this integrated network is gone. We had the luxury of not doing that for a long time. If anything dispelled that, it was the North Korean recent statements that have said to the South Koreans, by the way, you are a legitimate tactical ballistic missile nuclear target for North Korea. If anything should have shaken the South Korean body politic, that should have done so. So the time to worry about whether we're too closely integrated with Japan or too closely integrated with the United States is long past. And I think we need to speed up actually what we're doing right now.
So integrating the three countries' missile defense system, Dr. Soofer, that's better for South Korean security.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, I want to move on to another topic. As the U.S. election year approaches, there's a lot of interest in the next administration's North Korea policy. And we know of the Biden administration's practical and calibrated approach. And President Trump's North Korea policy was recently reported that he is considering giving sanctions relief in return for North Korea's nuclear freeze and halt in new development of new weapons. Now, Mr. Lawless, some South Korean media expressed concerns that President Trump's idea is unconventional. But isn't this sanctions relief for nuclear freeze, isn't this idea floated in the previous administrations as well?
I think a whole range of things were floated. And I think that's most unsettling, and I think you may be referencing the recent Politico article, which suggested that a President Trump administration would be willing to trade away, if you will, a lot of security assurances to Korea and Japan in terms of a freeze on North Korean ICBM threat to the United States. I think this is a legitimate concern. I think the article brought out some of those issues, and I think inherently the unpredictability that a Trump administration brings with it, that a deal would be on the table or one could be made, is a pretty concerning topic. And I would expect that in the months ahead of us, before the 2024 election, there's going to be a lot of people beginning to follow this issue related to North Korea. Would the administration, a Trump administration, Republican administration, Democratic, be willing to enter into a discussion with the North Koreans that somehow puts the United States at less risk, but at the same time puts Korea and Japan at more risk? So I think it's a worthy topic.
So, Mr. Lawless, entering into that discussion, looking at a previous instance, President Trump held summits without preparatory working level talks. And doing that again, that summit without preparatory working level talks, wouldn't that give an opportunity for North Korea to take advantage of those talks?
I can't imagine that a President Trump or any new administration would go into discussions like that again without being better prepared. The fact of the matter was, those discussions were very poorly prepared for. Thank goodness President Trump had a national security team surrounding him at that time that compelled him to make the right decisions or not make bad decisions. But I think there will be a terrific attraction to make some kind of arrangement with North Korea. And again, my concern is that that would be to the disadvantage of the Republic of Korea and to Japan. And that is a very valid concern on the part of the political leadership of those two countries.
Dr. Soofer, so you were with the DoD throughout the Trump administration. How reliable are these reports citing sources? And if indeed President Trump were reelected and were to go for a nuclear freeze, then the calls in South Korea for self-nuclear armament would grow even stronger. And then in which case, how would the United States respond to critics in South Korea, which say that U.S. tolerates nuclear armament of enemies and not that of the allies?
Right. Well, Richard is more of an expert on North Korea, North Korean policies, and I think he's right. But I think you might agree also, Richard, that Republican and Democratic administrations for the last couple of decades have been trying to solve this problem, and we've been unable to do so. And so we need some fresh thinking. We need some different thinking. I don't know if a nuclear freeze is the right answer, but I don't think a nuclear freeze is the same thing or sends a message that we're any less committed to South Korea, because the commitment, the extended deterrence commitment, is based on nuclear weapons. It's based on the deployment of U.S. troops in the region. It's based on a number of strategic capabilities in addition to nuclear weapons. We have treated North Korea as a as a proliferation problem. How do we stop it from becoming nuclear? Well, that train has left the station. They are nuclear. My own personal view is that it's going to be difficult to get them to give up their nuclear weapons. So now we must treat North Korea as a deterrence problem, And if we can limit the number of nuclear weapons they ultimately deploy, it's an easier deterrence problem to solve, right? And so my suggestion is let's keep an open mind about how to deal with North Korea and how the next administration might handle that.
South Koreans are concerned about nuclear parity. And if United States goes for nuclear freeze arms reduction negotiations with North Korea, then automatically South Koreans would think that United States is acknowledging North Korea having its own nuclear weapons, and that's why the calls in South Korea for nuclear weapon would grow. What are your thoughts, Mr. Lawless?
Well, I'm agreeing with Robert. North Korea is a de facto, self-declared, legitimate nuclear weapon state at this point. So this whole idea of we were not going to tolerate a nuclear North Korea went by the wayside 20 years ago, and it's been a failed policy. Deterrence is the name of the game, but deterrence in the context of both deterring North Korea from attacking the United States or having the ability to do so, but also deterrence on the peninsula. So whatever happens here as we go forward and we redefine our policy as being one of deterrence first, and how we define deterrence and communicate that to the North Koreans is going to be really important. So I think the stage is set for a reset, if you will, as to how we address the North Korean issue. It's not going to go away. It will only get worse. And so we have to come up with a strategy that anticipates North Korean actions, anticipates North Korean capabilities, and attempts to keep those contained and deterred.
So United States focusing on deterrence with North Korea and acknowledging North Korea as a de facto nuclear weapons state, wouldn't they become a source of conflict with Yoon Suk-yeol government, which is a hard line against North Korea?
I think it all depends on how we do it, deterrence-wise. I'll give you an example. If someone were to suggest that we're only interested in constraining North Korean capabilities vis-a-vis the continental United States, the Hwasong 18 threat, if you will, and we're limiting our discussion with North Korea to deterring that threat, that would be a problem. What we have to do is address this in a comprehensive way that says, yes, we have a Hwasong ICBM threat to the continental United States, but we still have a growing threat to the Republic of Korea and Japan. So to your point of satisfying the body politic of Korea and the Yoon government, I think we'd have to make sure they understood we're not going to get into a discussion with the North Koreans that ignores their interests and only focuses on the continental United States, the ICBM threat. To me, that's the danger of entering a discussion with the North Koreans if you allow the North Koreans to make this a U.S. North Korea ICBM discussion only. That has terrific negative potential for the region.
Dr. Soofer, you mentioned about deploying more SM-3s to create that underlayer to supplement the missile defense system. to create that underlayer effect, do you think more THAAD should be deployed to South Korea as well?
Thank you. And Richard, that was really well said. I think we have to be cautious about how we handle the problem. When we talk about the underlayer, it's usually in the context of homeland missile defense. So the overlayer, if you will, is the ground-based interceptor, and the SM-3 missile is the underlayer. So you have at least 2 layers of defense against a missile. In the context of the South Korean area, we have also multiple layers. We have THAAD, which intercepts missiles higher up, and then we have the Patriot, which intercepts missiles lower down. So a layered defense of South Korea would include more Patriots and more THAADs.
And you did mention about some of the ranges in those missiles that were deployed in South Korea, but China complains that THAAD can look into its military facilities in China. Is that true?
We can look into Chinese facilities with our spy satellites. We don't need THAAD radar to do that. It is a spurious comment.
Mr. Lawless, so China already has a radar that ranges the entire Korean peninsula, and for China to object to South Korea deploying THAAD on its land, isn't that going against South Korea's sovereignty?
Well, as Robert said, the whole idea, the whole theme that the Chinese developed to intimidate the Moon government into trying to block our THAAD deployment was completely ridiculous. The fact that some people bought into it, particularly in that government, was sad. But I want to emphasize that, THAAD in and of itself is extremely important. And when we deployed THAAD in the Republic of Korea, we deployed it to protect a given U.S. facility or a given range of U.S. facilities. What you really need in the Republic of Korea is for the Republic of Korea to deploy THAAD, rather than just the United States deploying THAAD. I don't know if the Republic of Korea has gone that direction, but the idea that THAAD is sitting there as a U.S. facility defending Seoul is completely erroneous. If you want to defend the most valuable target in Northeast Asia, it's Seoul, Republic of Korea. And to do that, you should have THAAD. Mm-hmm. And so I'm saying that if you really want a robust defense of the Republic of Korea, there should be more than one THAAD system there, and they should be Korean THAADs, not American THAADs.
Mm-hmm. And Japan has a similar one, which is Army Navy Transportable Radar Surveillance, which is a primary terminal radar for THAAD. How come China is not so upset about this system?
Well, I don't think Japan is immune from these Chinese criticisms about their missile defense systems. Why is China provoking South Korea perhaps more? Maybe they think that South Korea is more vulnerable in terms of their domestic politics. I don't know.
Why is so?
I would agree with that. I think the Chinese simply found a soft spot with the Moon government to intimidate them and managed to do so. The current Yun government is much stronger, much more dedicated to doing what they have to do. But I will say, I want to go back to something we talked about earlier. Republic of Korea and Japan both have sophisticated air defense platforms, ballistic missile defense platforms. They have their Aegis ships, both of them. They have ground-based systems, but there's so much more they could do. Those Aegis ships have to be totally upgraded and integrated into a comprehensive system. Japan, Korea. We don't have a lot of time to do this, and it has to get done quickly. And more importantly, there is a political overlay here. Right now, we have this beautiful holiday between Japan and the leadership of Japan, the leadership of Korea with President Yoon, and our leadership here in the United States. We have another year to make more progress, and we shouldn't waste this window of opportunity so that we can advance integrated missile defense.
The sense of urgency is spot on. In fact, you've seen the reports that Japan has now transferred Patriot units, Patriot missiles, through the United States to Ukraine. You see how valuable these systems are. I think between South Korea, Japan, United States, we all need to build up our inventories of interceptor missiles.
Well, that's all the time we have for this week. Dr. Soofer, Mr. Lawless, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Pleasure to be here.
And thank you for watching. We'll be back here next week with U.S. experts to discuss the two Koreas and the region right here from Washington.